Thank you very much, Uskali, for your nice introduction to this theme, and I just want to add one background information that is probably quite important, because I'm also a pediatric pathologist. I'm not only academic professor, but also doing clinical work with dead bodies, and that somehow is reflected in this talk as well. So that I don't claim that I'm a professional in death, but I have just to work with it and scope it. And the questions that you already mentioned will be discussed first against the life, because you can't say that when you break a stone, you kill the stone. Or can you? But if you break a worm and kill it, then you can say that you are a killer. So that we are having a clear view that death is possible only for living creatures. And then the problem is that what is then life? And to be honest, this can be a very short story, because I can say that nobody knows what is life. Because we know life only from this planet, and in one case you can't make a rule, you can't make a definition. You have to find life somewhere else in the space. And then we probably sometimes in future know what is life. And then it closes the story, because you can't define the life, you can't define death, and that's all. But this is not the reality, because we know that we are alive, and we know that we die, and then this is the story. Now we start going through the events that we know are existing. And the way how I approach this, I asked from our colleagues in biomedical in Hartman, in Meilahti area anyway, that what is life, and they mostly said, I don't know, I don't care. First of all, most physicians don't care about life. And Italian postdoc in our laboratory said that life is sometimes very nice. And the Finnish postdoc said that I have never time to finish anything. Series of unexpected events and coughing cells and organisms. Life is reproduction, said the gynecologist. And this is a real student. He said that this complicated mixture of physical-chemical reactions that under certain conditions give rise to more than the total of the contributing reactions. Wow. Full points. Boring. Cardiologist said that life is respiration of cells. Pathologist said that life is contrary to death. And he said that life for him meant that he wants to be happy. And the life is time before death, heart beating, descriptions of various things. I mean, all kinds of features that happen, people know that happen with life. And tired mother said, I have already divided, don't ask me. Life is teaching, said the professor. Life is people, food and sex, that's also right. And the head of the previous Institute of Health and Welfare said that now this is the right answer. Nowadays life in Finland is for men 76 years and for women 84 years. Boom. And that's the story. So what do we learn? We learn that you can't define life, that's very clear to all of us, but we can define the features of life. We can say that life has certain characteristics, and we can collect these features and characteristics that when we find life or something that looks like life somewhere else on exoplanets, then we can see that this is a planet that is interesting, much more interesting than the other planets. that don't show these features. And David has published a list of these features, and there are several other lists, but I just want to list these because I mean they all are very much the same. It's independent. The wind blows and the clouds follow with the wind, and sometimes you can see that the clouds don't follow, and then you can see that maybe this cloud is alive. It reproduces, it has its own metabolism, it consumes energy, it's complex, it's highly organized, and it grows and develops, and the information is built in the machine itself. And that's it. And now when we compare this list with the existing life forms, we can say, yes, we are humans, we fulfill all the criteria of living creatures. The mule doesn't reproduce, it doesn't fulfill this feature. And then viruses, they are not anymore very much alive, but the computer virus that we have made has exactly the same characteristics. And the dry seed that we know is alive, if we send the dry seed to atmosphere or to space, it can stay alive without showing any evidence of life, because it's not producing, it's not growing, it's not evolving, it doesn't have the metabolism, etc. And so when we cannot define life, we cannot define death. But when we go through the list of various theories of beginning of life, we have very interesting story, because eternal life theory indicates that it has always been there. As long as we have had space, the life has been there. This theory was presented by Vernadsky, Russian. And then we have this very beautiful panspermia, so that we have kind of life growing all over from planet to planet. And there is good evidence at the moment that there are amino acids in the cold space, and most likely this is very close to become more prevailing theory, and it's very interesting and beautiful theory. And it was presented by Svante Arrhenius from Denmark. And it probably evolved in hot water and tropical lagoons, but then recently it was also presented that maybe it was developing in the bedrock, because that made kind of shield for the first cell, because we know that the basic unit of all or most life forms is cell, and the bedrock as a material could have provided this shape, mold to start it. Okay, because we know only life on this planet and nowhere else, it is already very clear that it's a very, very rare event. And if we think of a simple protein with 20 amino acids, the likelihood is 10 to minus 40,000. It's very, very unlike. But this unlike event becomes possible if you have enough time and if you have unlimited number of chemical reactions. And that's why in the scale of universe, the life is probable. Earlier it was thought that the death material can create life. And Jan Baptista von Helmont did an experiment in 1622, and he described this result. Put a dirty skirt in an open barrel, add seeds, and after 21 days mice are born. Exact. I have been working all my life with mice, and Thomas knows that the pregnancy of mice is 21 days. So, the spontaneous creation was killed by Louis Pasteur, 1859, with an experiment where the bottle was filled with sugar liquid and the open bottle was infected and was full of life, and the same liquid with sworn neck that prevented the inflow of bacteria remained sterile and was without life. But in fact, already 1668, the father of experimental medicine, Francesco Redi, did the same experiment. He used meatballs. He put the meatballs in open and closed bottles, and only when the bottle was open, it was soon full of life forms. So, spontaneous creation story from life from death is not anymore valid, but it is. Because Stanley Miller and Sidney Fox, Nobel laureates, did the experiment. First, Stanley Miller combined water, methane, and ammonia to build up amino acids, and it was working. And Sidney Fox showed that the artificial proteins can be developed from the amino acids, so that we can create material of life from death material. And that happens in the universe all the time. These chemical reactions are very simple, and that's why it's one of the basic events in the space. So, in our life forms, the basic unit is cell. And Greg Venter has analyzed how many cells, how many genes are needed to make a living cell. And this approximation was done based on the genome projects from various bacteria, viruses, and eukaryotes. And he published his results in 2010, and it's approximated 300 genes. And with these totally biosynthetic genes that he packed in the mycoplasm, he could make a totally biosynthetic life form. And so boring paper is probably the key paper of this century. And it's the beginning. It took 10 years. But from this on, this kind of biosynthetic life is going to be more and more common and will be used for more and more purposes in technology and in medicine, etc. And this is from Pihlström, and I think it's very nice. I think this envisions the future. We will see these type of features, creatures and features in animals much more and more in near future. And as a developmental biologist, I always ask, is it possible or not? Thomas, you know, you are a biologist. You also know. Is it possible or not? Is this fake? And this is of course fake, but I mean theoretically, can we do this type of six-legged pig? No? Propose. Yes or no? Yes. Yes, and why? Because we are worms with segments, and we can duplicate the segment and make 2 more legs, but we cannot make 3 legs or 5 legs, because the duplication results a new segment for our body, and this is right. Pihlström, bra magazine. Okay. Okay, the first thesis is that because we cannot define life, we cannot define death. But that's boring, because the death is there all the time. Life without death doesn't exist. When we are born, we know that we are going to die. And death has various definitions, and I think the important medical definition is the political one. We have in Finland the first law on brain death in the world. 2001, Kansas was the first place in the world, but it's not state. We are the first state where the death was defined in legislation, so that when you are brain dead, you are dead, even though your heart is beating. So that one organ is dead and all other organs are alive. And why is this definition important? Because then we can get organ transplants, and that's why it's important. And it's working pretty well, so that the end of brain function means death, even though the body, other organs of the body are alive. The abortion law in Finland says that you can get abortion if the fetus is less than 22 weeks. Please.
Just do we know for sure that the brain is dead?
Good question. The official answer is that of course we know, because it's analyzed with EEG, and it's analyzed physically. I mean, all these type of patients are analyzed, and all neurological functions are tested. But then you have these very rare cases, the sensational cases that some people have waked up being dead for weeks or months. It's a very difficult point, but I don't know. If we don't use the brain death definition, then we don't get organs for transplantation. And that's it. It's so brutal. Whole Europe is nowadays following the Finnish way, and the brain death is accepted in most countries as a major definition of death. And it's a political issue. We need the organs to help people. Otherwise, many people die because the shortage of the transplantable organs. It's tough. Okay, abortions can be done before 22nd weeks of gestation, and the gestation weeks are counted from the beginning of the last menstruation period, and it means that the embryo is on average 20 weeks. And if it's born spontaneously or after induced abortions, then the embryo at that stage is so immature that it cannot live. I mean, it's not compatible with life outside of the uterus. And thereafter, if the embryo or the fetus is dying spontaneously, it's miscarriage or stillborn. And we make in Finland 16,000 abortions because of medical or social reasons annually. And we have about 200, 300 stillborn babies. And these numbers tell how common are deaths before birth. Every 8th fetus is going to die during embryogenesis. And if we are expanding this to the first weeks of pregnancy, the spontaneous abortion rate goes up to 70. You ladies remember this when you start making the baby at the age of 45. Because the pregnancies are very often terminated spontaneously. Then people cry that, oh, that's it, my life is totally destroyed. Then we have the fact that the death is not black and white. If we follow the death of people, I mean, the first organ that is destroyed after the cardiac arrest, for example, is brain. It's very sensitive to hypoxia. But then the skin and liver and kidneys, they are quite tolerant, so that they survive hours. And because of this tolerance, it's possible take these organs and put them to cooler and transplant after one day to somebody who is needing these organs. So the death is a sequential process and not at all black and white at certain time point. Then we have this ecological definition. We have the death of an individual versus the extinction of the species. Because, I mean, the individual is dying, but in most cases and many cases, he has produced littermate. We call them babies. And they continue life, and they have the same genetic material. And that's why you can think that your life is going on in these children. And that's why the species extinction is the final death of certain species and the final death of this type of life. Not before that. And then we have, of course, these psychological definitions. I mean, for me, who work with the death babies and fetuses every day, death is just normal day, another day like all others. But for those who get the first, are having the first pregnancy and then the baby is dying or the fetus is dying, it's totally unnatural. It's total catastrophe. And we physicians, we easily make mistakes when we say that this is natural. You know for sure that the life is trying to try to clean the malformed babies and that's why it's easy. I mean, it's the best thing that happened that this is now then. I mean, it's not like this. For these women that have miscarriage, it is a very sensitive and difficult psychological process. Okay, I have 4 children, and these are mine and daughter-in-law and mine, and you can see that they are heavily pregnant, and that was a year ago. And of course, because of the background, I mean, you know, I was convinced that at least one is going to die. Because what we can see, I mean, there are this type of creatures that are totally malformed and look ugly looking. They are everyday job for pediatric pathologists. And this is the outcome. 3 completely healthy, beautiful ladies, female musketeers, and not a sign of any malformation, and totally alive. Yesterday we were biking around Vanhan Kaupunkilahti and it was fun. So maybe it's good that you take the realistic aspect. I mean, our life is most likely this 84 years and so forth. But because of Mother's Day, Helsingin Sanomat published the dark side of the coin. Reetta Räty's very beautiful article. I don't know whether anyone has read it. But I mean, it was very touching because she's handling this situation, the miscarriage problem and stillborn problem, and it is really kind of holy thing. You don't speak about that if that has happened to you, because you don't want to say that, okay, it failed. And still it is really very sensitive. And these quotations, kuolema löi äitiä kasvoihin, sinusta ei elämä jatku, sinä kuolit, tai sitten ei ole mitään. Or this viimeisen ponnistuksen jälkeen avasin silmäni ja näin kalpean lapsen roikkuvan kätilön kädellä. They tell how much this brings suffering to those who remain. I mean, ironically, death is very easy to those who die. Thereafter you don't feel anything. That's it. But those who are following it and remain here, then they are suffering. And that's why, for example, these suiciders, they are trying to punish the other people, and they are really making really bad things for the survivors, those who remain. Death is inevitable, and it comes when it comes, and some die in utero, some die during the birth, sometime after it, and sometimes we are having a long life. The longest living people are something like 120,000 almost, 160,000, 80,000 at least. That doesn't really matter, because there's a huge variation. It matters that when you die, you have to have the right diagnosis, because then we know that the medicine has done all its best and all it can do. We can't rescue, and our aim, the aim of medicine is not to rescue people to eternal life, but to cure diseases that they have so that they maybe continue living a couple more years. Okay, the last question that we probably cannot answer, kind of theory of death and life. I mean, it's like this tree. It's the tree of life. And it doesn't grow and flourish without death, because that's the same thing and the same process, just the beginning and the end. Thank you.